I never thought a rain garden would almost land me in jail, but when you live under an HOA run by someone like Deborah Pritchard, even the EPA can't save you from months of absolute hell. It started on a Tuesday morning in April 2025, when I was standing in my front yard in Asheville, North Carolina, watching the rainwater pool against my curb for the third time that week. My house sat at the bottom of a gentle slope on Maple Ridge Drive, which meant every storm turned my lawn into a swamp while the water tried to find somewhere to go. The city's storm drains were overwhelmed, and my grass was dying from constant saturation. I had talked to my neighbors, Nathan Holloway and Marcus Green, about the drainage problem, and they had the same issue. Something had to change. I'm Nicholas Harper, by the way, a civil engineer by trade, which meant I actually knew what I was doing when it came to water management. I had been living in the Meadowbrook Estates development for 3 years, and while the neighborhood was beautiful with its tree-lined streets and well-maintained homes, the HOA was something else entirely. Deborah Pritchard had been president for 5 years, and she ran the association like her own personal fiefdom. Every violation notice came with her signature flourish, and she seemed to take genuine pleasure in finding things wrong with people's properties. But I wasn't going to let that stop me from fixing a legitimate problem. I spent the next 2 weeks researching solutions and came across EPA-approved rain gardens, also called bioretention cells. These were shallow depressions in the landscape that collected rainwater runoff and allowed it to slowly filter into the ground while native plants absorbed pollutants. The EPA not only approved them, but actively encouraged their installation as part of green infrastructure initiatives. Better yet, North Carolina had its own programs promoting rain gardens, and the city of Asheville offered rebates for homeowners who installed them. I contacted the city's Stormwater Services Department and spoke with a coordinator named Michelle Roberts. She was enthusiastic about my project and walked me through the permitting process. I needed to submit a site plan showing where the rain garden would be located, what native plants I would use, and how it would manage the water flow. The process took about 3 weeks, but I got full approval from the city in early May. They even sent an inspector to verify my measurements and soil composition. Everything checked out perfectly. The rain garden would be about 15 feet long and 8 feet wide, positioned in my front yard where the water naturally pooled. I would excavate it to about 8 inches deep, line it with a special soil mixture that promoted drainage, and plant it with native North Carolina species like cardinal flower, swamp milkweed, blue flag iris, and river oats. These plants thrived in wet conditions and had deep root systems that helped with water infiltration. The whole setup would handle about 600 gallons of runoff during a typical storm. I was excited when I started the work on a Saturday morning in mid-May. The weather was perfect, sunny and mild, and I had rented a small excavator to help with the digging. My neighbor Nathan came over with coffee and donuts around 8 in the morning, watching as I carefully marked out the area with stakes and string. "That's going to look great," he said, munching on a glazed donut. "You think it'll really help with all the standing water?" "Should make a huge difference," I replied, double-checking my measurements. The city inspector said our whole street could benefit from a few of these. Once people see how well it works, maybe others will install them too. I had just started the excavator when I saw Deborah's white Lexus SUV pull up to the curb. My stomach dropped. She climbed out wearing khaki pants and a pressed pink polo shirt, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight ponytail. She had her phone in one hand and a leather-bound notebook in the other, the same notebook she carried to every HOA meeting to record violations. "Nicholas Harper, what do you think you're doing?" she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. I turned off the excavator and climbed down. "Good morning, Deborah. I'm installing a rain garden to handle the drainage problem on this part of the street." Her face had already turned that particular shade of red that meant trouble. "You absolutely did not get HOA approval for this. I would remember something this significant." "I didn't realize I needed HOA approval," I said carefully. "I got full approval from the city of Asheville. They issued a permit and everything. This is an EPA-approved environmental project." "I don't care if God himself approved it," Deborah snapped. "According to Article 7, Section 3 of the HOA bylaws, any modification to front yard landscaping requires written approval from the Architectural Review Committee. That's me, in case you forgot. And you definitely did not submit any paperwork." I felt my jaw clench. "Deborah, this isn't decorative landscaping. This is infrastructure to handle a drainage problem that's been affecting multiple properties. The city actually encourages these installations." "Then you should have encouraged yourself to read the bylaws before you started tearing up your yard," she said, scribbling furiously in her notebook. "I'm issuing you a violation notice effective immediately. You need to cease all work until you submit the proper forms and wait for committee approval, which can take up to 60 days. Nathan stepped forward. "Deborah, come on. This is a legitimate fix for a real problem. My yard turns into a lake every time it rains." She turned her glare on him. "Then maybe you should submit a formal complaint through proper channels instead of encouraging your neighbor to violate HOA regulations." She looked back at me. 60 days, Nicholas, and there's no guarantee the committee will approve this. Rain gardens aren't part of our approved landscaping palette. Your approved landscaping palette is azaleas and Bradford pears," I said, unable to keep the frustration out of my voice. "This is an environmental project with actual benefits. Our covenants are designed to maintain property values and neighborhood aesthetics," Deborah replied coolly. "Little mud puddles filled with weeds don't accomplish either of those goals. You have until Monday to fill that hole back in, or I'll be adding daily fines of $100 to your violation notice." She turned on her heel and walked back to her Lexus, driving off with the satisfied air of someone who had just won a battle. Nathan and I stood there in stunned silence. "She can't actually stop you, can she?" Nathan asked. "I mean, you have a city permit." "I don't know," I admitted, "but I'm going to find out." I spent the rest of the weekend doing research instead of working on the rain garden. The excavated area sat there like an open wound in my front yard, mocking me. I read through the entire HOA bylaws document, all 47 pages of dense legal language. Deborah was technically right about Article 7, Section 3. It did say that front yard landscaping modifications required approval, but it also had an exception clause for repairs and maintenance necessary to protect the property. I could argue that managing dangerous water accumulation fell under that exception. More importantly, I found information about North Carolina state law regarding HOAs. They couldn't prohibit modifications that were required by state or federal law, and they had to act reasonably when reviewing requests. There was also a growing body of case law around HOAs trying to block environmental improvements. Most of it favored the homeowners, especially when government agencies had already approved the projects. On Monday morning, I called the EPA's regional office in Atlanta. After being transferred 3 times, I finally reached someone in the Office of Water who specialized in green infrastructure. His name was David Chen, and he listened patiently while I explained my situation. "This is actually more common than you'd think," David said. HOAs sometimes struggle with the concept that environmental projects might not look like traditional landscaping. Let me send you some documentation. We have fact sheets specifically about rain gardens and HOA regulations. We also have case precedents where HOAs attempted to block EPA-approved projects and lost. Would the EPA actually get involved in something like this? I asked. We can provide technical support and documentation, David replied carefully. We can't force your HOA to approve anything, but we can make it very clear that rain gardens are not only approved but encouraged by federal policy. Sometimes that's enough to change people's minds. He emailed me a packet of information within an hour. It included technical specifications for rain gardens, EPA policy statements supporting green infrastructure, letters from the EPA to other HOAs in similar situations, and a list of federal and state regulations that protected environmental improvements. The documentation was impressive and official-looking, full of government seals and signatures. I printed everything out and drove to the Meadowbrook Estates HOA office, which was actually just a converted bedroom in Deborah's house. She had set up a desk and filing cabinets and held office hours on Monday and Wednesday afternoons. When I knocked on her door at 2 in the afternoon, she answered with an expression that suggested I was something unpleasant she had found on her shoe. I have the forms, I said, holding up a manila envelope. Application for architectural review, site plans, plant specifications, and supporting documentation. She took the envelope like it might explode. You'll hear back within 60 days. I also wanted to give you this, I said, handing her the EPA packet. It's information about rain gardens and federal environmental policy. I thought it might help the committee make an informed decision. Deborah flipped through the pages with barely concealed contempt. The committee will review your application based on HOA standards, not federal suggestions. These aren't suggestions, I said. The EPA actively promotes rain garden installation. The city of Asheville already approved my project. North Carolina has programs supporting this exact kind of environmental improvement. And Meadowbrook Estates has standards for landscaping, Deborah replied. Standards that every homeowner agreed to when they purchased their property. Just because the government likes something doesn't mean it belongs in our neighborhood. I took a deep breath. Deborah, can I ask what specifically concerns you about the rain garden? Maybe if I understand your objections, we can find a solution. My objection is that you violated HOA rules, she said flatly. And now you're trying to bully your way into approval by waving federal documents around. This is about respect for the community and its standards. We don't allow vegetable gardens in front yards. We don't allow clotheslines. We don't allow boats or RVs parked in driveways. And we don't allow amateur landscaping projects that make the neighborhood look trashy. A rain garden isn't trashy, I protested. When it's finished, it'll be beautiful. Native wildflowers, ornamental grasses, natural stone borders. It'll look better than half the lawns on this street. In your opinion, Deborah said, the committee will make the final determination. 60 days, Nicholas, and your daily fines start accumulating tomorrow if that hole isn't filled in. I left feeling more frustrated than ever. That evening, I got an email from Deborah with an official violation notice attached. It listed my infraction, the relevant bylaw section, and the penalty structure. $100 per day until the violation was corrected, with the option to appeal to the full HOA board at the next quarterly meeting in August. That was 3 months away. I called my lawyer, Tom Stevenson, first thing Tuesday morning. Tom had handled my house closing when I bought the property, and I knew he had experience with property law. Can they really fine me $100 a day? I asked after explaining the situation. Depends on what your HOA agreement says, Tom replied. Most HOAs in North Carolina can levy fines for violations, but they have to follow their own procedures. They usually need to give you an opportunity to cure the violation or appeal before fines start. Did the notice mention anything about that? It said I can appeal at the next board meeting, but that's not until August. And the fines start immediately, tomorrow, apparently. Tom made a considering sound. That might not hold up. Send me copies of everything: your HOA agreement, the bylaws, the violation notice, your city permit, and that EPA documentation. Let me review it all and I'll get back to you. I spent Tuesday gathering documents and emailing them to Tom. I also took detailed photographs of my excavated rain garden site, showing the measurements and the professional way I had marked everything out. It didn't look like an amateur project. It looked like exactly what it was, a carefully planned environmental improvement. On Wednesday morning, I found a printed notice stuck to my mailbox. It was from Deborah, reminding me that I now owed $100 in fines, and that the amount would increase by $100 each day the violation remained uncorrected. She had also sent the same notice by certified mail, which arrived that afternoon. I had to sign for it. Nathan came over that evening with beers. We sat on my back deck, which had a view of the excavated area in my front yard. "This is insane," Nathan said. "She's really going to fine you $100 a day for trying to fix a drainage problem." "Apparently," I said. "My lawyer is reviewing everything, but who knows how long that'll take. Meanwhile, I've got this giant hole in my front yard that I can't work on, and the fines are piling up." "What if you just finished it anyway?" Nathan suggested. "Like, what's she actually going to do? Take you to court?" "Maybe," I admitted. Tom said HOAs can place liens on properties if fines go unpaid. Eventually, they could even force a foreclosure, although that's pretty extreme. "Over a rain garden," Nathan looked appalled. "Over not following HOA rules," I corrected. "That's how Deborah sees it anyway. This isn't about the actual garden, it's about her authority." Thursday morning brought another surprise. I was getting ready for work when my doorbell rang. A man in a polo shirt with an Asheville Code Enforcement badge introduced himself as Inspector James Morrison. "I got a complaint about unpermitted excavation work at this address," he said, consulting a tablet. "Someone reported that you were doing construction without proper authorization." "I have full authorization from the city," I said quickly. "This is a permitted rain garden project. Hold on, let me get the paperwork." I ran inside and grabbed my file of documents, including the approved permit from Stormwater Services. Inspector Morrison reviewed everything carefully, even walking around to look at the excavated area. "Everything looks in order," he said finally. "Your permit is valid and the work matches what was approved. Who filed the complaint?" "I'm guessing my HOA president," I said. "She's been trying to stop this project." Morrison made notes on his tablet. "Well, from the city's perspective, you're in full compliance. I'll file a report clearing you of any code violations. If anyone asks, you can tell them the city confirmed your permit is valid and the work is authorized." That was some good news, at least. But when I got home from work that afternoon, there was another notice on my mailbox. Deborah had filed a formal complaint about my property being in a state of disrepair and degradation that negatively impacts neighborhood aesthetics and property values. This one included photographs she had taken of the excavated area, making it look as stark and unappealing as possible. I was reaching my breaking point. Friday morning, I called David Chen at the EPA again. "It's gotten worse," I told him. "The HOA president is actively trying to sabotage the project. She filed a false complaint with the city, and she's fining me $100 a day. Okay, David said slowly. This is definitely escalating beyond what's normal. Look, I can't get directly involved in your HOA dispute, but I can do something that might help. Would you be comfortable if I contacted your HOA president directly to explain EPA policy on rain gardens and green infrastructure? Would you really do that? I asked. It's part of our outreach mission, David replied. We want to encourage green infrastructure adoption, and sometimes that means educating stakeholders who might not understand the benefits. Give me her contact information and I'll reach out. I provided Deborah's email and phone number, along with a brief summary of the situation. David promised to contact her within the next few business days. I felt a small surge of hope. Maybe hearing from an actual EPA official would make a difference. That hope lasted until Saturday morning, when I found Deborah standing in my front yard taking more photographs. She was making a show of documenting every angle of the excavated area, zooming in on the exposed dirt and the equipment I had left covered with a tarp. Can I help you? I called from my porch. Just documenting ongoing violations for the HOA records, she replied without looking at me. This eyesore has been here for over a week now. The neighbors are complaining. Which neighbors? I asked. That's confidential, Deborah said. But multiple residents have expressed concern about the appearance of your property. I walked down to the edge of my yard. Deborah, I submitted the application like you asked. I provided all the documentation. What else do you want from me? She finally lowered her phone and looked at me directly. I want you to follow the rules like everyone else. I want you to show respect for this community and its standards. And I want you to understand that you're not special just because you have some fancy city permit and EPA paperwork. This isn't about being special, I said, trying to keep my voice level. This is about fixing a real problem with an approved solution. Why are you so opposed to this? Because it sets a precedent, Deborah snapped. If I let you do whatever you want because some government agency says it's okay, what's next? Someone wants solar panels that don't match the approved color palette. Someone wants a wind turbine. Someone wants to tear up their lawn and plant a wildflower meadow. Where does it end? It ends with common sense, I replied. A rain garden is a reasonable solution to a drainage problem. It's not some radical environmental statement. That's your opinion, Deborah said, and you're entitled to it. But I'm the Architectural Review Committee chair and I'm entitled to mine. You'll get your answer in 60 days, assuming the committee even approves a hearing. She walked back to her Lexus and drove off, leaving me standing there feeling defeated. I went inside and found an email waiting from Tom Stevenson. The email was long and detailed, but the summary was both good and bad news. The HOA did have the right to review my landscaping modifications, but they were required to act reasonably and follow their own procedures. The immediate fine structure without an opportunity to cure or appeal was probably invalid. The provision allowing appeals only at quarterly meetings might also be problematic, as it created an unreasonable delay. On the other hand, I had technically violated the bylaws by starting work without HOA approval, even though I had city approval. Tom's recommendation was to continue pushing forward with the appeal process, while simultaneously demanding that the HOA stop the daily fines until they provided a fair hearing. He drafted a letter for me to send to Deborah and the HOA board, citing North Carolina law and legal precedents. The letter was professional but firm, making it clear that I was willing to fight if necessary. I sent the letter via certified mail on Monday morning. I also sent a copy to every member of the HOA board, which consisted of Deborah and 4 other residents. I didn't know the other board members well, but I was hoping at least one of them might be reasonable. Tuesday afternoon, I got a call from an unknown number. When I answered, a pleasant female voice introduced herself as Jennifer Banks from the EPA's Office of Water. "I'm calling as a follow-up to your consultation with David Chen," Jennifer said. "He asked me to reach out to your HOA president regarding your rain garden project. I spoke with Miss Pritchard yesterday." "How did that go?" I asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. Jennifer paused. Miss Pritchard was not particularly receptive to the information I provided. She maintained that HOA regulations supersede federal recommendations and that her committee has sole authority over landscaping decisions. I explained that rain gardens are an EPA priority and that we actively encourage their installation, but she was unmoved. "So it didn't help at all," I said, my heart sinking. "I wouldn't say that," Jennifer replied. I documented our conversation, and I sent her a formal letter outlining EPA policy and the federal government's position on green infrastructure. I also made it clear that the EPA views efforts to block environmentally beneficial projects as contrary to our mission and priorities. That documentation could be helpful if this situation escalates to legal action. "You think it'll come to that?" I asked. "I hope not," Jennifer said. "But based on my conversation with Miss Pritchard, she seems quite committed to her position." I got the impression this is personal for her, not just procedural. That assessment matched my own experience with Deborah. This had stopped being about landscaping rules and had become about power and control. Wednesday brought a response to Tom's letter. It came from a lawyer representing the HOA, a firm called Patterson and Associates. The letter was coldly formal, rejecting our arguments and asserting the HOA's absolute right to enforce its covenants. It stated that the daily fines were valid and would continue to accumulate until the violation was corrected. The letter also threatened additional legal action if I continued to harass HOA board members or failed to comply with violation notices. "Well, they lawyered up," Tom said when I forwarded him the email. "That's actually a good sign in a weird way. It means they're taking your resistance seriously, but it also means this is going to get expensive if we can't reach a resolution." "What are my options?" I asked. "We can file suit against the HOA," Tom said. "We'd argue that they're acting unreasonably and in violation of North Carolina law. We'd also challenge the fine structure and demand they provide you with a timely hearing. The EPA documentation would be helpful, and the fact that you have full city approval strengthens your case. But litigation is expensive and time-consuming, and there's no guarantee we'd win." "What's the alternative?" "You could fill in the excavation and reapply through proper HOA channels," Tom said. "Submit everything before you start work next time, wait for approval, and hope the committee is reasonable. Or you could just pay the fines and finish the project anyway, then deal with the consequences." None of those options were appealing. That evening, I sat on my back deck with a beer and tried to figure out what to do. I had already spent weeks on this project and hundreds of dollars on permits and materials. The excavated area was sitting there waiting to be finished. And every day that passed, the fines accumulated. At this point, I owed the HOA over $1,000. My phone rang. It was Marcus Green, my other neighbor who had been dealing with drainage problems. "Hey, man, I heard what's happening with Deborah and your rain garden," Marcus said. "That's messed up. Listen, I talked to some other folks on the street and we want to help. We're putting together a petition to present at the next HOA meeting. We're going to ask the board to approve your project and waive the fines." "Really?" I was surprised and touched. Yeah, really, Marcus said. This drainage issue affects a bunch of us, and what you're doing makes sense. Deborah doesn't represent the whole neighborhood, even if she acts like she does. We're going to show up and make our voices heard. That gave me a boost of energy. Thursday and Friday, Marcus worked on gathering signatures for the petition. He talked to homeowners up and down Maple Ridge Drive and the surrounding streets. By Friday evening, he had 47 signatures from residents supporting the Rain Garden project and requesting that the HOA approve it. Meanwhile, I continued documenting everything. I took daily photos of the excavated area to show that I was maintaining it properly and that it wasn't becoming an actual safety hazard or eyesore. I kept copies of every email, letter, and notice. I recorded the accumulating fines, which had now reached $1,500. The next board meeting wasn't scheduled until August, but Tom sent a letter demanding an emergency hearing to address my appeal. North Carolina HOA law required boards to provide reasonable access to dispute resolution, and making someone wait 3 months while daily fines accumulated was arguably unreasonable. The HOA's lawyer responded with a counteroffer. They would schedule a special board meeting in mid-June, about 3 weeks away, to hear my appeal. However, the daily fines would continue until the meeting, and there was no guarantee the board would rule in my favor. Tom advised me to accept. It was better than waiting until August. I spent the next 3 weeks preparing my presentation for the board. I created a PowerPoint with photographs of professionally installed rain gardens, technical specifications, benefits analysis, and cost comparisons. I included the EPA documentation, the city permit, letters from the EPA officials, and the neighbor petition. I also found articles about how rain gardens increased property values and improved neighborhood aesthetics when properly maintained. The special board meeting was scheduled for June 17th at 7 in the evening, held in the community center clubhouse. When I arrived 15 minutes early, I was surprised to see that the small meeting room was already filling up with neighbors. Marcus was there, along with Nathan and at least 20 other residents. Some I recognized from the street, others I had only seen in passing. Deborah looked furious when she walked in and saw the crowd. The other board members, 2 men and 2 women ranging in age from their 40s to their 70s, looked uncomfortable with the turnout. They sat at a table at the front of the room while everyone else took seats in folding chairs arranged in rows. Deborah called the meeting to order at 7 sharp. This is a special session of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA Board to hear an appeal regarding violation notice Med-2025-41, she announced. Nicholas Harper has appealed the violation notice issued for unauthorized landscaping modifications. Mr. Harper, you have 15 minutes to present your case. I stood up and walked to the front with my laptop and notes. I had practiced this presentation a dozen times, but my hands still shook slightly as I connected my laptop to the projector. Thank you for hearing my appeal, I began. I'm here tonight to request approval for a rain garden installation on my property at 718 Maple Ridge Drive. This is an EPA-approved environmental project that the city of Asheville has already fully permitted. The purpose is to address a significant drainage problem affecting multiple properties in our neighborhood. I walked through my presentation methodically, explaining the drainage issue, the rain garden solution, the native plants I plan to use, and the benefits for the community. I showed before and after photos from other neighborhoods where rain gardens had been successfully installed. I shared the EPA documentation and read excerpts from Jennifer Banks's letter. The federal government actively encourages this type of green infrastructure, I said. The EPA views rain gardens as a priority for water quality improvement and stormwater management. The city of Asheville not only approved my project, but offered a rebate to help cover costs. I have a petition signed by 47 of your neighbors supporting this project. I handed the petition to one of the board members, a woman in her 50s named Patricia Donnelly. She reviewed it with raised eyebrows, flipping through the multiple pages of signatures. In conclusion, I said, I'm asking this board to approve my rain garden installation and to waive the fines that have accumulated during this dispute. I violated the HOA procedures, and I apologize for that. But I did so while following all city requirements and implementing a project that benefits our entire community. I'm asking you to act reasonably and support an improvement that will address a real problem while enhancing our neighborhood's environmental stewardship. I sat down, and Deborah immediately stood up. The board will now deliberate, she announced. We'll take a 5-minute recess. The board members filed into a side room while the rest of us waited. The room buzzed with conversation. Several neighbors came up to tell me they thought my presentation was excellent. Marcus clapped me on the shoulder. You nailed it, he said. There's no way they can say no after that. But when the board members filed back in 5 minutes later, Deborah's expression told me I wasn't going to like the answer. The board members took their seats, and one of the men, an older gentleman named Robert Finley, cleared his throat. The board has reviewed your appeal, Robert said. While we appreciate the time and effort you put into your presentation, we have to uphold our existing covenants and bylaws. Article 7, Section 3, is clear about the requirement for pre-approval of landscaping modifications. The board cannot retroactively approve work that was begun without proper authorization. Therefore, your appeal is denied. The room erupted. Several neighbors shouted objections. Marcus stood up and said, "This is ridiculous. You're punishing him for trying to fix a problem that affects all of us." Deborah banged a gavel on the table. "Order. This is not a town hall meeting. The board has made its decision." Patricia Donnelly was frowning, looking uncomfortable. "I'd like to add something," she said. "While we're denying the appeal for the work already performed, I don't see any reason why Mr. Harper couldn't fill in the current excavation and resubmit a proper application for future approval. The Architectural Review Committee could then evaluate the project on its merits." "That's completely reasonable," I said quickly. "If the board will commit to evaluating a new application fairly and promptly, I'll fill in the excavation and reapply." Deborah's face had turned crimson. "The committee will review any application according to its standard procedures and timeline," she said stiffly. "That's all we can commit to." "What's the timeline?" Tom asked, standing up from where he had been sitting in the back. "Up to 60 days for committee review, and then the application goes to the full board," Deborah replied, "as specified in the bylaws." "That's unacceptable," Tom said. "Mr. Harper has EPA support, city approval, and a petition from neighbors. The committee should be able to reach a decision within 2 weeks." "The committee will follow its established procedures," Deborah shot back. Robert Finley held up his hands. "Let's compromise. Miss Pritchard, as committee chair, can you expedite the review process given the circumstances?" "Maybe 30 days instead of 60. Deborah looked like she had bitten into a lemon. "Fine, 30 days, but that's only if Mr. Harper submits a complete application with all required documentation." "And the fines?" Tom asked. "The fines stand for the original violation," Deborah said. "Mr. Harper owes the HOA $2,100 as of today, and that amount will continue to increase until the violation is corrected." "That's extortionate," Tom replied. "We'll be challenging those fines in court." "You're welcome to try," said the HOA's attorney, a sharp-faced man in his 30s who had been sitting quietly in the corner. The covenants clearly authorized the fine structure. The meeting dissolved into arguments after that. Eventually, Deborah adjourned the session and the board members left, leaving the rest of us to mill around in frustration. "What are you going to do?" Nathan asked me. "I honestly don't know," I admitted. "I can't afford to keep accumulating fines." But I also don't trust Deborah to approve the application even if I go through her process. Tom pulled me aside. "Here's what I recommend. Fill in the excavation to stop the fines. Submit the new application immediately. And while we wait for the HOA's decision, we prepare a lawsuit. If they deny the application or drag their feet, we file in court. With the EPA support and the neighbor petition, we have a strong case." It wasn't the outcome I wanted, but it was the practical move. That weekend, I spent 2 days filling in the rain garden excavation with soil. It felt like defeat, shoveling dirt back into the hole I had carefully dug, but at least the daily fines would stop. Neighbors came by to offer sympathy and help. Marcus and Nathan both spent hours working alongside me, and Marcus's wife brought us sandwiches and cold drinks. By Sunday evening, the excavation was filled in, and the area was covered with temporary sod. It looked like nothing had ever been there, which somehow made it worse. Monday morning, I submitted a new application to the HOA Architectural Review Committee. The application was perfect. I included every possible piece of documentation: site plans, plant lists, soil specifications, maintenance plans, construction timeline, EPA letters, city permits, engineer certifications, and photographs of successful rain garden installations. The application packet was over 50 pages long. I delivered it personally to Deborah's house and made her sign a receipt confirming she had received it. 30 days, I reminded her. The board agreed to expedited review. "The committee will review your application thoroughly," Deborah replied coldly. "We take our responsibility seriously." The next 4 weeks were agonizing. I checked my mailbox obsessively, waiting for a response. Tom had prepared legal documents ready to file if the application was denied. We had also sent a demand letter to the HOA regarding the accumulated fines, arguing that they were punitive and unreasonable. The HOA's lawyer had responded saying they would consider reducing the fines if I complied with all violation corrections, but they made no specific commitments. In mid-July, 28 days after I had submitted the application, I finally got a response. It came by certified mail, requiring my signature. My hands shook as I opened the envelope. The letter was from Deborah as Architectural Review Committee Chair. It stated that the committee had reviewed my application and had serious concerns about the appropriateness of a rain garden for the neighborhood aesthetic. The letter listed a series of objections. The proposed plants were not consistent with the approved landscaping palette. The excavation would create visual disruption during construction. The finished garden might attract mosquitoes and pests, and there were concerns about property values. The letter concluded by denying the application, but offering me the opportunity to revise and resubmit with modifications that address the committee's concerns. I called Tom immediately. "They denied it," I said. "They want me to resubmit with modifications, but their objections are completely arbitrary. There's no way to address them without completely changing the project." "That's what I expected," Tom said grimly. "They're not acting in good faith. Okay, time to file suit. I'll have the documents ready by the end of the week. We're going to request an injunction requiring the HOA to approve your project, and we're going to ask for damages, including your legal fees and the waiver of those fines." True to his word, Tom filed a lawsuit against the Meadowbrook Estates HOA on Friday, July 18th. The complaint laid out everything: my EPA approval, city permit, neighbor support, the HOA's unreasonable denials, and their excessive fines. We sued for declaratory judgment, injunctive relief, and damages. The lawsuit got attention fast. On Monday morning, a reporter from the Asheville Citizen-Times called me asking for comment. Someone had tipped off the media about the case. "Is it true you're suing your HOA over a rain garden?" The reporter asked. I was cautious in my response. It's true that I've filed suit. The core issue is whether an HOA can block an EPA-approved environmental project that's already been permitted by the city. I believe they're acting unreasonably, and I'm asking the court to intervene. The story ran on Wednesday with the headline, "Asheville Man Sues HOA Over EPA-Approved Rain Garden." It included quotes from me, from Tom, and from Deborah, who said the HOA was simply enforcing its covenants to protect property values and neighborhood character. The story also mentioned the EPA's involvement, which seemed to surprise a lot of readers. That article caught the attention of a local environmental group called the Green Asheville Coalition. Their director, a woman named Sarah Martinez, reached out to offer support. "We'd like to file an amicus brief supporting your case," Sarah said when we met for coffee. "This is exactly the kind of issue we care about. HOAs blocking environmental improvements is a significant problem, and we want to help set a precedent." Having the Green Asheville Coalition on my side was a huge boost. They had resources and expertise that I didn't, and their involvement showed this was about more than just my personal dispute. The HOA responded to the lawsuit with a motion to dismiss, arguing that the court had no jurisdiction over internal HOA matters. Tom filed an opposition brief, and we had a hearing scheduled for late August. Meanwhile, the local media continued to cover the story. I gave several interviews, always emphasizing the environmental benefits and the EPA's support. Deborah refused most interview requests, but the HOA's lawyer issued statements saying they were defending the rights of homeowners to maintain their neighborhood's character. Public opinion seemed to be on my side. The newspaper's comment section was overwhelmingly supportive, with people sharing their own HOA horror stories and praising the idea of rain gardens. Several other residents from Meadowbrook Estates reached out privately to tell me they supported me, but were afraid of retaliation from Deborah. The hearing on the motion to dismiss was held on August 27th before Judge Helen Richardson in Buncombe County Superior Court. The courtroom was small but packed with observers, including several reporters and members of the Green Asheville Coalition. The HOA's attorney argued that this was a private contract dispute between me and the HOA, and that the court should respect the HOA's right to self-governance. Tom argued that the HOA had violated North Carolina law by acting unreasonably and in bad faith, and that they were blocking a project that served important public interests. Judge Richardson listened carefully to both sides, asking pointed questions. When the HOA's lawyer claimed the rain garden would damage property values, she asked for evidence. When he couldn't provide any, she looked skeptical. "It seems to me," Judge Richardson said, "that this project has been approved by multiple government agencies with relevant expertise. The EPA says it's beneficial. The city says it's permitted. The question is whether an HOA can override those expert determinations based on aesthetic concerns. I'm not prepared to dismiss this case at this stage. Motion denied. We'll proceed to discovery and set a trial date." That was a victory, but it also meant the litigation would continue for months. Tom warned me that HOA cases could drag on, and the expenses would keep mounting. I was already several $1,000s into legal fees, and we hadn't even reached trial yet. But something unexpected happened in September. I got a call from Robert Finley, the older board member who had seemed sympathetic during the appeal hearing. "Nicholas, this is Robert Finley from the HOA board," he said. "I hope you don't mind me reaching out directly. I wanted you to know that there are some of us on the board who think this situation has gotten out of hand. Patricia Donnelly and I have been discussing it, and we believe the HOA should settle." "Settle?" I repeated, surprised. "Yes," Robert said. "We think you should be allowed to build your rain garden. The problem is Deborah. She's dug in her heels, and as long as she's committee chair, she's going to keep blocking you. But Patricia and I have been talking to the other board members, and we think we have enough votes to overrule her decision." "Can you do that?" I asked. "The bylaws allow the full board to override committee decisions with a majority vote," Robert explained. "We've never done it before, but given the circumstances, we think it's appropriate. We're calling a special board meeting for next week. I can't promise anything, but I wanted to give you a heads up." I immediately called Tom and filled him in. He was cautiously optimistic. "If the board votes to approve your project, that could resolve everything. We'd still need to address the fines, but that's a separate negotiation. Don't get your hopes up too much, but this is a positive development." The special board meeting was held on September 10th. Once again, the clubhouse was packed with neighbors. Deborah looked furious as she sat at the board table, clearly aware that something was happening beyond her control. Robert Finley called the meeting to order. "We're here tonight to reconsider the Architectural Review Committee's denial of Nicholas Harper's rain garden application. Several board members have requested a vote to override that decision." "This is highly irregular," Deborah interjected. "The committee spent extensive time reviewing the application and reached a considered decision. And the board has the authority to review that decision," Patricia Donnelly said firmly. "I'd like to make a motion. I move that the board approve Nicholas Harper's rain garden application as submitted, finding that the project serves important environmental purposes, has been approved by relevant government agencies, and has substantial neighbor support." "I second the motion," Robert said immediately. Deborah's face was scarlet. "This is a mistake. You're setting a precedent that will undermine the HOA's authority." "I disagree," said one of the other board members, a man in his 50s named Kenneth Morrison. "I think we're correcting a mistake and showing that this board can be reasonable." "I support the motion." The vote was 4-1, with only Deborah voting against. The application was approved. The room erupted in applause. Neighbors were cheering and congratulating me. I felt a wave of relief so intense I almost had to sit down. But Deborah wasn't finished. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I resign from this board effective immediately," she announced. "I will not be part of an organization that abandons its principles and caves to outside pressure. This neighborhood's standards are being destroyed, and I want no part of it." She gathered her papers and walked out, leaving the remaining board members looking at each other in shock. Patricia spoke first. "Well, I guess we'll need to elect a new committee chair. But first, Mr. Harper, congratulations. You're approved to proceed with your rain garden." There was still the matter of the fines, but Tom negotiated a settlement over the next few weeks. The HOA agreed to waive all fines in exchange for me dropping the lawsuit. It wasn't perfect, since I had already incurred substantial legal fees, but it was better than continuing to fight. I started work on the rain garden in early October. The weather was perfect for planting, and this time, there was no one to stop me. Neighbors came by to watch and offer encouragement. Nathan and Marcus helped with the heavier work, and several other residents asked for advice on installing their own rain gardens. The project took about 2 weeks to complete. I excavated the depression, installed the proper soil mixture, planted all the native species, and added a border of natural stone. When it was finished, it looked beautiful, a graceful curve of lush green plants with splashes of color from the wildflowers. The first major rain came in late October, and the system worked perfectly. Water that would have pooled on my lawn instead flowed into the rain garden, where it was absorbed and filtered. The city of Asheville sent an inspector to verify the installation, and I received my rebate check in November. The city also featured my rain garden in their stormwater management newsletter as an example of successful green infrastructure. In December, I got an email from David Chen at the EPA. He had seen the news coverage and wanted to follow up. "I'm glad things worked out," David wrote. "Your case is actually getting some attention within the agency. We're considering developing guidance specifically for HOAs to help them understand their role in either supporting or blocking environmental improvements. Would you be willing to share your story as a case study?" I agreed, and the following spring, the EPA published a fact sheet about rain gardens and HOAs that included my experience. It outlined the benefits of rain gardens, explained relevant environmental regulations, and provided recommendations for how HOAs should evaluate environmental projects. Deborah never returned to the HOA board. She remained in the neighborhood but kept to herself, rarely attending community events. The board elected Patricia Donnelly as the new president, and under her leadership, the HOA adopted new procedures for reviewing environmental improvement projects. They created an expedited review process for projects with government approval and established criteria that emphasized environmental benefits alongside aesthetic concerns. My rain garden became something of a neighborhood attraction. Other residents asked for tours, and several installed their own versions. The drainage problems that had plagued Maple Ridge Drive improved significantly as more rain gardens went in. Property values actually increased, contrary to Deborah's predictions. I kept in touch with the Green Asheville Coalition and even gave a presentation at one of their meetings about navigating HOA resistance to environmental projects. My story resonated with a lot of people who had faced similar obstacles. Looking back, the whole ordeal lasted about 7 months from start to finish. It cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees and caused enormous stress. But it also taught me important lessons about persistence, community support, and the power of doing the right thing even when facing opposition. The rain garden still thrives in my front yard. Every spring, the cardinal flowers bloom bright red, attracting hummingbirds. The blue flag irises add purple accents in early summer. The ornamental grasses sway gracefully in the breeze. And every time it rains, I watch the water flow into the garden and slowly percolate into the ground, filtering pollutants and recharging groundwater, exactly as the EPA intended. It was worth fighting for, even when fighting for it seemed impossible.